Hi, I'm Bob Doman, and this is another section on what happened to your brilliant child. So we want to discuss all those pieces that are prohibiting your child from being everything you want them to be, we all want them to be. I've talked about auditory sequential processing. Now I want to talk about some pieces that affect that development, why your child may have that problem today. Now, I've already talked about the input and the significance of input. Lots and lots of talking to the child, lots of the opportunity for your child to develop that. But let's talk about some of the things that would interfere with that. At the top of the list is something called auditory tonal processing, and a very close second to that is something called figure ground processing. All right. And we want you to understand that so you can see if that might be an issue with your kids. Tonal processing simply means your brain's ability to hear all the frequencies of sound. And lots of kids have issues with this. And sadly, a lot of these issues need not have developed. Often the cause of this is fluid in the middle ear. Incredibly common problem. An incredibly common problem. And unfortunately, it's one of those problems that falls between doctors, if you will. All right, it's typically not something that your pediatrician is going to look at carefully. Your pediatrician is going to be concerned about ear infections and looking in your kid's ears and see if there's an ear infection. But generally, they're not looking to see if there is fluid in the middle ear. Often that discovery doesn't take place unless you've actually taken your child to an ENT or an audiologist. And they will do a simple test called a tympanogram. All right, a tympanogram is a test for fluid. It's not an audiogram. It's not a hearing test per se. It's a tympanogram. The audiogram, which is the hearing test, I almost wish for most kids, to be honest, that they didn't give them. All right, because when they do an audiogram, they test about 6 frequencies of sound. All right. Well, your brain processes a humongous range of sounds, like 20,000 frequencies. If you do an audiogram, you'll find out if your kid's deaf or if your kid has a major hearing loss. But the brain has to learn how to process specific frequencies of sound, very specific frequencies of sound. And the problem with many kids in their development is they get these fluid issues, and it's constantly changing how the sound is getting transmitted through the ear into the brain. And because of that, the child does not develop good tonal processing, not hearing all the frequencies as they should. Okay, this can be a really big issue relative to your child's then ability to process sequentially. One of the good ways to understand the tonal processing is to look at it relative to learning a foreign language. Most of us have a difficult time learning a foreign language, as in learning how to enunciate it well without an accent, simply because we can't hear it. Someone could come in and say something in Greek and we could all repeat exactly what we heard, and the odds are we're all going to repeat it wrong because our brains haven't learned to process the frequencies that are emphasized in that language. One of the most obvious issues with that is in the Japanese language, they don't have the letter R. So we could bring in a bunch of native Japanese folks and line them up and say, everybody say rice, and most of them are going to say lice because they can't process that frequency. All right, so this is just a little insight in terms of if anything interferes with the input, it's going to interfere with our ability to process those frequencies. And to whatever degree we have a problem, or John has a problem processing the frequencies, they're going to have a problem then understanding the language and developing their sequential processing. We often see, for example, families that bring in their little kids or 3, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds whose language is delayed. And often we find the foundation of that is the auditory tonal processing, which then impacts the auditory sequential processing. All right, big deal. Another big issue is figure ground. That means essentially your ability, the brain's ability to concentrate on what's in the foreground as opposed to the background, which means your child can listen to you or your child can listen to their teacher and not be constantly distracted by the airplane up at 30,000 feet, the kid walking down the hall, the kid scratching his head behind him. All those frequencies, all those sounds that are in the background tend to be what the child's brain focuses on. All right. So these are a couple of pieces that can really affect your child's auditory development, which can, again, be the factors that are affecting that global function that you want, and big issues relative to you helping regain that brilliant child you have. So when we're working with an individual child, we got to look at their pieces, identify what's inefficient, what's broken, if you will, and if we're going to reach that potential, find that brilliant kid hiding in there, we got to take care of all those issues. Thanks.